Hey guys, we're back on the couch for another Therapy Thursday session. And today I want to talk all about relapses and slip-ups in recovery because unfortunately, as even though you go into recovery with the best intentions, making that commitment to yourself that things are going to get better, things are going to change, you're not going to resort back to those old behaviors. Unfortunately, slip-ups and relapses, they're just part of the process. I really want to emphasize that and put that out there from the start because we got to think about this in slightly different terms. You've been a certain way, if I'm correct, for a certain period of time, and this may be a couple of months, years, or even longer. Now, in order to achieve full recovery, this involves completely relearning a whole new way of being, a whole new way of thinking, feeling, and acting, and basically being a whole new person in this world. And unfortunately, that requires a learning process. This is learning. It's like learning a new way of being. And part of learning involves making mistakes. You know, when have you learned to ride a bike or drive a car? All of those things, you're making little mistakes along the way, but it's all part of the process to get to where you want to be. And I want you to start viewing your recovery as a learning process where you will make mistakes. And that's a natural, common part of this process. And when I was in recovery, I was still hanging on to some of my perfectionistic tendencies. And I entered recovery believing that it was just going to be smooth sailing, that I would take X amount of time, I would slowly make baby steps forward, I would keep making progress, steps, and finally I'd be full recovered. But it wasn't like that. And I found the setbacks very, very damaging and very challenging to move on from. And it had a really big impact on my recovery process, the way I viewed those relapses and slip-ups. And I remember this really vividly. Every time I would have a relapse, every time I would resort back to one of my eating disorder behaviors, I felt like a failure. And for me, it felt like I was back to square one. And I punished myself. I punished myself for the slip up. Rather than looking at this constructively as part of a learning process, I beat myself into the ground for being a failure. And what that did is it took my focus away from the thing that I was trying to achieve, the growth I was trying to make. I took this very, very personally and used it against myself. And I got stuck in this spiral, this circle of kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that 1 step back was a really big step because of the pressure and because of the expectations I placed on myself. And I had to change my mindset to get out of this. I had to start viewing those relapses and slip-ups as something different. And really, this is all about the meaning that you're placing on the mistakes that you're making. So, for example, if you're placing that a slip-up or a relapse would mean that you're a failure, and this means you're back at square one, guess what's going to happen? Your brain is going to immediately take you back to that place and perceive that you are starting again from scratch. And that is a really big task to try and build yourself back up from. However, if you're viewing this recovery as a learning process, and you see a relapse or a slip-up as a simple mistake but an opportunity to learn, it's not something personal on who you are as a person. This is a learning process. It is much easier to see the positives and see where you can actually make changes from that one mistake that you made. Because really, there's no such thing as failure. It's actually all feedback. Okay? There is no such thing as failure. It is all feedback. And remember, if you're relearning a whole new way of being around food and becoming a different person, you're not going to do this perfectly. There's going to be needed to make the mistakes to give you the feedback to make the changes that you need to make. Okay? So this is not a personal attack on you and who you are as a person. So when I was trying to work through this shift in mindset, what I realized was that I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a go-to strategy of what I would do when a relapse would happen. And what this did, without having something in place, it allowed that part of my brain, that negative voice, to jump in with the blame, with the criticism, with the failure, all of that narrative to jump in and sabotage myself. So I realized I needed to have a plan, which I would immediately turn to when I had a relapse. It kind of cuts out the decision work, cuts out the second guessing or trying to figure out what to do. And this plan was made up of 4 steps. And I'm going to go through each of these 4 steps. Now, I mentioned just now that slip-ups and relapses, they're not personal. As in, this is nothing to do with who you are as a person. However, the first step in any relapse or slip-up is we've got to accept responsibility. And what I mean by responsibility, that is, this is not blame. Accepting responsibility is accepting that you played a part in what happened, but it is also down to you in what happens next. As in, it's down to you in what happens with the next step that you take. That's responsibility. Blame is like what I've just mentioned, that negative voice jumping in, criticizing you, beating you up, shaming you, guilting you. That is not constructive and it's not productive. It's not going to help you learn. It's actually going to hold you back. So accepting responsibility is the absolute first and most essential step. To take that responsibility of, okay, this has happened, but I am now in control of what happens next. I'm going to learn from this and move forwards. That's number 1. Step number 2 is, again, like I've mentioned earlier, we've got to change our perspective on how you viewed that slip up. Because the slip up isn't actually the issue. It's kind of the consequence of many things that could have happened earlier in the day. So we've got to dissect it. We've got to understand what led to that relapse. Because if we don't understand it, we're never going to be able to do anything different, right? We've got to break this down and actually start to deep dive and delve into what happened in my day, which led up to me having the relapse. And you may want to look at certain thoughts that you're having, certain feelings, certain behaviors, and also what was going on in your environment. Was it something that you didn't eat? Did you skip a meal? Were you triggered by someone? Were you on social media and you found yourself comparing? Were you thinking negatively of yourself? Were you body shaming yourself? Were you feeling anxious? All of these things are really important because, like I said, the relapse is like the last chink in the chain. There'll be other things that if we could intervene a little bit earlier and assess what's actually gone on before that happened would help you to not make the same mistake again. So looking for other things that have happened previously in your day which led to that slip up. And then we've got to learn from it. So once you've changed your perspective and looked at what factors were at play, we need to make a commitment. And what I mean by that is not make a commitment that you will never, ever, ever do this again. Because like I said, that's very unrealistic. It's setting yourself up to do the same thing all over again. It's not setting yourself up in a positive, constructive way, but it's making a commitment to do one thing differently. Just one thing. Because what I found in my experience is whenever I would have a relapse, I would look to change everything. I would reflect on my day and literally try to do everything different. But this is also really hard to do. It's too much. It's overwhelming. When you try and make too many changes at once, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, anxious, and then to not do anything at all. And to go back to the behaviors that felt safe and comfortable. Welcome food, right? This is what we're trying to move away from. So what we have to do instead is, okay, look at what happened in your day and commit to doing one thing differently. For example, did you skip breakfast? Okay, well, next time I'm going to make sure I eat breakfast. Were you being triggered by someone at work? You commit to walking away and having some time for yourself before doing anything else. Did you find yourself comparing on social media? I'm going to go through my social media and delete any accounts which I find triggering. Commit to one thing you would do differently and put that into practice, okay? It reduces the overwhelm and actually retains your focus on the thing that you're trying to achieve. And then finally, number 4, which is, again, probably the hardest, if I'm honest, but also an extremely important part, is forgiveness. Forgiveness is absolutely huge. When you hold on to resentment and judgment for what you've done, it's only going to keep you in that same place where you're stuck. Forgiveness is opening. And remember, if you're coming at this from a learning perspective, that this is part of the process, it's natural. Everybody has relapses. Nobody's perfect. Allow yourself to be forgiven. Because when you can do that, it actually helps you step into your power. And when you're in your power, you're able to learn from these things. And again, this is very, very difficult. And it might start with just a simple affirmation of, even though I did not like what just happened, even though I wish it did not happen, and I don't accept it, I can forgive myself because I want to learn from this and move forward. Can you see how you don't have to like it, you don't have to want it or accept it, but you can forgive yourself in order to learn? Very important, and that's a practice. And it took me months to be able to get to that true place of going, oh, okay, I can forgive myself for that, but I must learn from it in order to grow. It's a practice, because if you're anything like me, you've spent your however long in this place of beating yourself up, feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling judgment, criticizing yourself, hating yourself to try and change. So stepping from that into forgiveness, again, is going to take a little bit of time, but it's absolutely essential in order to heal and learn from the things that you did not want to happen, okay? So that's my 4-step plan. Accept responsibility, change your perspective, commit to doing one thing differently, and forgive yourself to move forward. Because remember, this isn't a linear process. It's going to be like this as you're learning this whole new way of being, okay? Remember, anything you've learned, any skill you've learned in the past, you made mistakes. And recovery is exactly the same thing. And recovery is a process. And a process and a practice that you have to keep committing to time and time again. Day in, day out is a practice. And I also want to share with you that these mistakes are okay. They're going to happen. But you do not need to win 100% of the time. In order to change, you can still have moments or days where you slip back into those old behaviors, but the difference is you're just winning the majority of the time. That's what we want to aim towards. It's like people who win an election, right? Politicians who win an election, they never win unanimously, right? They've always got votes for a different side, but they just need a majority rules. And it's the same with recovery. If you can work on majority of the time making steps forward and having those odd slip-ups come creep in every now and again, it does not matter. You're still going to get where you want to be. And that's what I want to say. Majority rules. You do not need to have to win 100% of the time in order to get to where you want to be. So put those into a bit of practice. Let me know how you go with that plan. If you've got any questions or comments on today's session, let me know in the box below, and like and subscribe for more videos. I'll see you at the next Therapy Thursdays. Take care.